Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Power to Pivot podcast. Joining me, I'm so excited for this interview. Neal Brownell is here. He is the author of You're Amazing and I'll Prove It. Dun, dun, dun. Here he is. There's the book. Neal, how are you today?
I am doing well. Thank you, Elizabeth, for
Thank you.
having me on.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I absolutely love this book. Um, it's like the mindset book of mindset books, really, because you're talking like we hear the term growth mindset. It's
Right.
and I feel like this epitomizes what that means to have a growth mindset. But really, your message is about acceptance.
It's about acceptance. Actually, I wrote the entire book. And when I finished it, I wasn't sure what it was about, to tell you the honest to God truth. I thought it was about accepting other people. And then we had preliminary readers, about 40 of them read it. And they came back to me and they said, Neal, well, you're partially right. It is about accepting other people, but primarily it's about accepting yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I
Yeah.
think, especially today. So the book itself is intended primarily for like middle schoolers, right?
To tell you the truth, it has reached everybody. It has reached kids that were there was one 9-year-old that was really, really cool. Linda and I have a house cleaning business. So some of our preliminary readers were the house cleaning customers. And one of them that we asked was a 9-year-old boy if he would read the book. Of course, we asked the mother first, and the mother told us that he probably wouldn't read the book because as she says, you've been in my house. You know that all my other kids are readers, but he's not a reader. So he probably won't read the book. Then I said, well, why don't we just go ahead and ask him? And if he says no, then what have we lost? And she says, okay, go ahead. So we asked him, and 2 weeks went by. We went back into the house, and he wasn't home, but the mother said that he really enjoyed it. So a couple hours go by, and this little boy walks through the door, and I didn't tell you who this little boy is, or was, I should say. He had a very low self-esteem. He wouldn't look you in the eye. He wouldn't say anything to you. And if you said anything to him, he would say a yes or no answer and then run out of the room. So when he walked through the door, Linda, my lady, walked up to him and says, thank you so much for reading the book. And he looked her right in the eye and says, it was really good. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's so funny because they will tell you the absolute truth of what they think. And I think that's amazing that he was so emphatic about it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that he now, in fact, we have a picture of it. We can send it to you. We have a picture of his room with books all over it. He's reading everything.
It like
Yeah,
totally changed his
yeah,
perspective.
yeah. And it was so cool because I saw myself in this little boy when I was growing up. I was the same way. And to see him change that much, that quickly was really awesome. And the other story you were saying, it's primarily for, younger kids, but we asked she's an acquaintance of ours that owns her own business, has everything. She has the big house. She has the wonderful family that she talks about all the time. She's got the cars. She takes the vacations. And we asked her if she would read You're Amazing. And she said, sure. So she reads it. A couple weeks go by. We go into her office. We sit down across from her at her desk. And she looks at us and literally gets tears in her eyes, streaming down her face. And she says, for the first time in my life, I realize I do have value.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What do you as the author say? Like that has to touch you right here, like in the heart. Did you think
I
that the book would have this kind of an impact?
I did not. I had no idea. The book actually started in a very unusual way. And I can tell you that story if you'd like. Lynn and I, like I said, Lynn and I have a house cleaning business. One day I was cleaning a very brightly lit room, and I looked up in the corner and there was a large spider. So I went ahead and I cleaned up the spider. I cleaned up the rest of the room. I then went into the very next room. The very next room is a guest bedroom. That room is almost always kept dark. And so in this room, there was a little bitty spider next to one of the windows. Well, I have the aptitudes of an inventor, and inventors ask the most ridiculous questions you ever want to see. And it makes no difference whether they make you look like a genius or make you look like an idiot. You have to ask the question and you have to seek out the answer. So when I saw the two spiders, I said, well, why? Why is there a big spider in a bright room and a little spider in a dark room? And after thinking about it for a little while, I realized that in the bright room, it draws lots of bugs. Lots of bugs means lots of food for the big spider. But in the little room, there's very little food, but it's plenty for the little spider. So at that point, one question leads to the next. And I said, all right, then which spider is better? And I started thinking about that. And I said, well, if you switch their roles, both spiders die. So neither spider is better than the other. The only thing that makes them special at all is what they bring to the world, where they fit in. And at that point, I'm an extremely spiritual man. I'm not a religious man, but I'm a very spiritual man. And I kind of heard this little voice say, you got it. Now write a book about it. And I also consider my higher power to be a friend of mine. And so I figure I can say anything to my higher power that I could say to a friend. And I literally said, are you nuts? You want me to write a book about a big spider and a little spider? I said, okay, if that's what you want, then that's what I'll do. So I sat down and I started writing the book, not knowing what it was. And like I just said earlier, that even when it was finished, I wasn't 100% sure what it was until my readers told me.
That's amazing. I think what I love, well, you can see that there's so much of an impact applicable across generations here. It's written in a way that, you're asking the question, which is better? What's your perception? And really, like you said, like they're both valuable. Where is little Neal in this story? Like, are you bringing in scenarios from your life, or?
There are some scenarios that are in there from my life. Little Neal was one of the last stories that I wrote. What happened was when I got the book done, or at least I thought it was done, I then started asking my friends, hey, will you, give speeches and promote my book? And all my friends just kind of laughed at me. And I said, what are you laughing about? They said, well, Neal, you're pretty good at speaking, so why don't you do it? And I'm like, well, I guess I could, but I've never done it. So I should join a group to learn how to polish it up and do better. So I joined Toastmasters. I don't know if you know what Toastmasters is. Toastmasters is an international group of people that get together, that they have clubs in different cities all over the world. And there's one right here in Kingston where I live. They get together, they're just businessmen and housewives and you name it, and they get up in front of each other and they give speeches, and then they help each other better themselves. And so I went to Toastmasters, and one of the really cool things about Toastmasters is that they told me that I could talk about anything I wanted. And I said, that is really cool. Anything at all, I can just get up and start talking about it. That's cool. So at the end of the first meeting, I put my hand up to see if I could get on the list so I could speak at the next meeting. And they picked me. And I said, great. So at the end of that meeting, I kind of ran up to the Toastmaster and I said, all right, I can talk about anything, right? And they said, no. And I said, no, you told me I could speak about anything. And they said, that is true with all the speeches except for the first one. And I said, well, what do I have to speak about on the first one? They said, you have to speak about yourself. And I said, well, why? They said, because you know yourself better than anybody else. And most people are terrorized to get up in front of people. So that would be the easiest speech to give. And I told them, I said, no, I do not want to do that. It may be easy for other people. It's going to be unbelievably difficult for me. And they said, well, too bad. If you want to speak, you've got to give a speech about yourself first. So that,
Okay.
So they had told me that that was too bad. I had to give that speech. So that night I came home, I sat down in my chair and literally had tears running down my face. And my lady comes over to me and says, sweetheart, what's the matter? I said, Linda, something told me to write this book, starting with a big spider and a little spider. Now they're telling me I have to revisit a time in my life I haven't gone to in more than 50 years. And not only do I have to do that, but they're telling me I have to put it in the book and I have to get up in front of crowds and I have to tell the story over and over and over. And I just don't know if I can do it. And so I went ahead and I wrote the speech and I went to Toastmasters and I did give it. And each time I give it, I do a little bit less crying, I guess.
So you really are your message, though, if you think about it. Like, you are the message that you're bringing forth. You've lived it.
That is true. And as an inventor, I can talk about things that I've done, things that I've experienced, and what I learned from those things. And so I try to tell the story in such a way that I tell everybody in my classes when I finally get, because this is the last story that I tell, and I say, I do not want anyone to feel bad for me because of what I learned from what happened. I said, if what I learned had to go through what I went through, then I would do it again in a second.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's such an important point, because oftentimes we hear these stories of things that people are going through or mindsets that they're in. And let's face it, we all go through hard points in our lives, and we can choose to hear it and see it in one of two ways. Either stay there, or we can learn from it and move on and get ourselves to the next point. And, you know, that second mentality, that mindset is not easy because I'll ask you, why do you think that is? Why is it so easy to stay almost in I hate to say victim mindset, but really that's kind of what it is in some ways.
I honestly, I can't answer that question the way you ask it, because as an inventor, the way that I think is, what is the simplest way to do this? And so when it comes to your personal life, I say to myself, okay, I can dwell on this and it's going to eat me alive for the rest of my life. Or I can learn from it and move on. Which is the easiest way? Well, learn from it and move on. So I just picked the easiest way.
I love that. You're right. I mean, you don't have to stay stuck. So every episode I close with saying you're never stuck, lost, or alone, and that you can always, the whole concept of the power to pivot is that you can always make a new choice. And the question that you just put out there for us could potentially be that next choice for somebody. What's the simplest way to move forward with,
Yes.
How did you train yourself? Maybe like, you're an inventor. Were you always naturally curious like that? And then you flip that switch to say, well, wait a minute, I don't just have to say this about my inventions. What's that moment like for you where you're like, I'm inventing, because you've invented some things. Like, I read your bio. So
yes.
where you're not just applying it to the scientific part, now you can apply it to your life.
Yeah, I actually try to, it's just the way I think. That's all there is to it. It's not anything that I did on my own. In years ago, when I was about 30 years old, I was just lost. I had no idea where my life was going. An inventor is interested in everything. And so if I got a job, I absolutely hated it after a few weeks or so. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? So I went down to New York City and I took an aptitude test by Johnson O'Connor. And this is an aptitude test that actually gives you puzzles and different things to do. So that's not a piece of paper that you just fill out. And by the time I finished this, they told me that I had the aptitudes of an inventor. Of course, my wife at the time, my first wife passed away. My wife at the time begged them to tell me that I was an electrician or anything but an inventor. But she was funny. But yeah, so that's how I discovered that that's what my aptitudes are.
Okay. So it's interesting because one of the things that we also talk about here is that the way we can create a positive shift in the world is by changing the questions that we're asking and creating this new conversation. Now, that said, it also comes from us because we also have to see the value in who we are to be able to see the value in other people.
Correct.
How do you teach workshops and things? So how do you propose this for other people when you're teaching your workshops?
Well, if I can tell you about little Neal, you'll understand just a little bit more. You would ask me a question, right? And that question was, what do I do in my workshops to get the people to see the value in themselves?
Yep.
Is essentially what you said.
Yep,
right?
correct.
Okay. So
what do
tell
you
me
do?
when to. So we're starting now.
We're
Okay.
good. Jumping right back in.
Okay. Well, I have to, in order to answer that question, I have to go through the story of little Neal. Again, I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me or anything like that. I do not hold anything against my parents. I believe they did the best that they could. And at the same time, they didn't have the information that we have today. So when they were parenting, they just didn't handle kids well. They just didn't. All of our siblings, or my siblings, went through really, really hard times, which other people would call abuse. So here's the story. I was born into a family with 5 older siblings, all of them straight A students. They didn't even have to try. But when I came along, it was a different story. To my parents and my siblings, I seemed like there was something wrong with little Neal. I seemed slow. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't read. I couldn't catch a ball. And so they took me to the doctors, and the doctor told them that, I don't know if I should use this word because some people are very offended by it, but they used the word, and I'll use it once, used the word retarded. I used mentally slow. And so my parents, they were horrified. How could they possibly have 5 book geniuses and then have a defective little boy? Well, at that point, they started teaching me that I was worthless, that I was never going to achieve anything. And this went on, and I finally went to 1st grade, and I didn't make it through 1st grade. I failed 1st grade. And at the end of 1st grade, my teacher was so frustrated with me because I am an inventor, and that was part of it. I wouldn't accept part of what they were teaching me. I wanted them to prove it to me, and they couldn't prove it to me. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going to listen to something that you can't prove to me. But that was only part of it. The other, I couldn't read, I couldn't do anything. And so my teacher in front of me called my mother in and told my mother that she wasn't going to spend 1 second teaching, that she should just put me someplace and get rid of me. And so this, at the end of 1st grade, like I say in the class, needless to say, I failed 1st grade. At the end of 1st grade, somebody suggested to my parents that I have my eyes checked. Well, when they took me to the eye doctors told them without glasses, I was pretty much blind. And so at that point, you would think, hey, my parents are like, all right, he's not mentally slow, he's blind. But no, not my parents. They said, oh, no, we not only have a mentally slow boy, but we have a blind mentally slow boy. And so they continued teaching me that I was literally worthless. And they pushed me on until I got to 5th grade. Now, I'm only 11 years old. And so at 11 years old, I have been taught by the very people who love me the most that I have no value of any kind. So they finally pushed me to 5th grade. There's no way. I shouldn't have made it past 1st grade because I was only doing 1st grade work. And finally they said, well, they need to put me into a special school for handicapped kids and just to kind of hide me someplace. Well, I went to this new school, and there I met Mrs. Anderson. I tell everybody, I call her my first guardian angel, because Mrs. Anderson did 2 extraordinary things, and yet unbelievably simple. The first thing she did was she didn't listen to what everybody else said that I was. She took the time to observe me, to watch me, to determine for herself who this little boy was. The second thing she did, after she observed who I was, she literally got down on her knees, looked me directly in the eye, and she says, "You're smart." Well, like I said, I had been taught that I was worthless. And so you can't tell somebody that believes something, anything. And so I looked at her and I said, "No, I'm stupid." And she said, "Nope, you're smart and I'll prove it." In fact, that's where the name of the book came from. "You're amazing and I'll prove it." She then gave me real simple assignments. I had no idea that they were first grade assignments. I had none whatsoever, but she gave me assignments that she knew I could do. And at the end of every assignment, she would hold the piece of paper up in front of my face and she'd say, "See, you're smart and this proves it." So she allowed me to discover it myself. And that's what You're Amazing is all about, discovering your value yourself. I don't, I can say it to you all I want, but you're not going to understand it until you see it yourself.
I think that's amazing, especially because as I'm listening to it, and I could hear almost, parents saying that to their kids, while that might not have been the case with you, you know, or even in education, with the teacher going, "You're smart, you're smart, you're smart." There's always that thought that, are they just saying that because they
Right.
have to? And I think that when you're allowed to discover that for yourself and prove it to yourself, that's where the impact really is.
Yes, that's when it sticks. Yeah, and she changed my life at that point. She changed my life forever. I'm the person I am today because of her.
So at that point, being in her class, is that was the shift for you? Because
Yes.
you're like one of the most, talking to you, the most positive person. You're very relaxed. You don't, I would never have thought that was your background. You don't define yourself based on the negative part, it seems.
No, I don't. And part of that also is my spirituality. I tell everybody from that story, what I learned from that story was two things. One, because I was blessed, and I do mean blessed, to be born essentially blind. I spent the first 7, almost 8 years of my life getting to know people by sensing their spirits rather than seeing their physical form. The other thing that I learned from it is all it takes is one person to change another person's life forever. And I try to be that person with everybody I meet. I don't always succeed, but I really try. And so I see value in people where people tell me, just like Mrs. Anderson, people told her who I was and she didn't listen. And people tell me that this old farmer over here, he's crazy, he's worthless, just throw him away. Well, that old farmer wound up being one of my very best friends.
There's a point that you make, and I want to find it real quick in the book. Hang on 1 second for me, because I actually am going to open it up. There's a point that you make, and it does not just apply for education, it applies in families, whether it's the part when you're talking about the second lesson in basketball.
Okay.
It also, I think, applies in leadership, for executives, for management. I mean, this is why I love this book. Because, and again, going back to the fact that it's applicable across the ages. But you say, and I'm going to read this whole paragraph if that's okay.
That's fine.
The second lesson I learned from basketball was that you never know how valuable any one person may be. Never judge a person based on what they can't do. Always look for what they can do. Nurture a person's strengths, and you will be amazed at what they will contribute, not just for your life, but to the other people's lives as well. Never underestimate anyone. Everyone is special. So I'm thinking about this in terms of businesses.
Okay.
And how it can be really easy to put people into buckets based on first impressions.
Yes.
And if you take them out of their buckets and let them really show you what they can do and celebrate that success, and then you allow them to show you and lead you to where they can be successful to benefit you and like benefit the organization overall, it kind of changes the game, I feel like, for companies.
Absolutely.
So I look at it from the business perspective. I mean, I work in education, so the fact that this is written and is a kid can sit down and read it, and you have testimonials from kids who have read it, that's amazing too. Because I look and I see kids struggling. They're distracted. It's really easy to be distracted today with virtual learning. And, you know, schools are battling with COVID-19 and how do you teach? And we need books like this. So I'm so appreciative that you have this available. Where can people find your book?
You can find it on Amazon, and you can find it. My lady just reached for my cards, so because she's the one that takes care of all those things.
Does Linda mind stepping on the screen?
Step on the screen.
She's like your tech lady. Hello, lovely Linda. Thank you for helping us with the sound before the video started, before we got started.
Thank you for helping with the sound.
Oh, no worries.
Okay. Books are available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And they're on our website. They are You're Amazing and I'll Prove It.com. And do I give them the Gmail? No? Okay. So those are the two places.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay.
Now, I want to switch gears for a second, because the one question that is burning on my mind is the fact that you've said you're a spiritual person, but you're also very scientific and you're the inventor guy.
Yes.
In our world, those two worlds don't always overlap. It's like one's on one side, one's on the other. I think you have already answered this question, because you said you grew up the first several years of your life with the ability, or you could only read a person by their energy to
Correct.
Tell who they were.
Correct.
But how do how does the science Neal and the spiritual Neal come together?
That's a very interesting question. I actually have a YouTube video on that. Science Proves God Exists is the final, is that the final? If that's not the final title, it's really close to that. And I go through how literally science has proven, in my opinion, that there is a higher power. And I can go through the whole thing if you want me to, but essentially it comes from the space program, it comes from string theory, and it also comes from a book where the military is right now investigating how psychics work, and they actually train men and women to project themselves other places in the world and be able to watch what's going on psychically, and they've proven that this works.
How do you talk to the skeptic about that? Who goes, how was it proven? Can we really trust that? That's kind of hogwash. Because I love talking about spirituality and energy. I believe we can feel the energy, like feel into who a person is. And, you walk into a room and you can kind of get the energy of what's happening. If you tune into it. So how do you talk to as the science guy, how do you talk to the skeptics who go, that's bad research?
At Toastmasters, I gave a speech on this, and people had their mouths open when I was done. And I'm like, that was pretty cool. Anyway, excuse me. I start out by saying that the space program in 1972 launched the first deep space probe. This probe was designed to tell us everything about our solar system. Well, as you know, scientists can predict where that spacecraft should be incredibly precise at any given time. And yet 8 years later, the spacecraft wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was well short. And because of that, they had to figure out what was going on here. And they found out that the spacecraft was hitting something in outer space. And outer space was literally named space because it was thought to be empty. Well, there are 5 characteristics of God. One is that she, omnipresent. You're going to write him down for me?
No.
He's omnipresent. He's all-knowing. You caught me off guard here.
No,
I wasn't 100%.
You're good.
He's all-knowing.
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere.
He knows everything.
Well, we already got that one.
Okay. Everything is possible.
Everything is possible within, and he can do anything. Okay. All right. So when the spacecraft hit this energy, the scientists said, "Oh my goodness, it's hitting this mysterious energy in outer space." Well, when I was watching the program, I started laughing, and Linda says, "What are you laughing about?" I said, "They just found God, because that was the last piece that I needed. How can God be absolutely everywhere?" And this proves that this energy is everywhere. Well, energy also scientifically cannot be made and it cannot be destroyed. So that means it always has been and it always will be. If this energy is everywhere and everything is made out of this energy, then that means that the energy is all knowing. If everything is made out of this energy, that means the energy can do anything it wants. And in string theory, it tells you that the energy can do literally anything. It can go back in time, it can go forward in time, it can go anywhere, and it can make or destroy anything. So it covers all 5 characteristics of a higher power.
I have chills as I listen to that, because so I have a course on energy that talks about the fact that you can't create it or destroy it. It can be transmuted though. And I think that I think your book is the first part, is a really strong first step to some of the lower level energy that we sit with when we sit with a law, like that mindset of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. If you think about the fact that you can change that, there's so much power there.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Everything starts with the person knowing they have value. Everything starts there.
I love it. I love it. I am so excited. I want everyone to read a copy. It's You're Amazing and I'll Prove It. Again, tell us where you can find it. Amazon.
On Amazon and on you'ramazingandillproveit.com.
Okay. And then I'll make sure that everything is in the show notes for where people can find you. Do you have Instagram and Twitter and all that? Are you on social media?
We got Instagram and Twitter. Twitter. And we have Facebook. Twitter and Facebook. And I was looking at my sidekick here.
Lovely, Linda.
So Facebook, just Neal G. Brownell, and Twitter is at Neal G. Brownell.
Okay. And so I'll make sure that those are also all in the show notes for people to reach out. How are workshops coming? Are you able to do workshops given the current climate? What have you got cooking in the next couple of months?
Unfortunately, because of COVID, nobody's doing any classes whatsoever. I tried to do some classes online this way, and it's just not the same. When you can look into your audience's eyes and see that you're reaching them, or look into their eyes and see that you're not reaching them, and you have to change a couple of little things. It's just so spiritual to be able to do that. And that's where I'm really at my best. But so right now we have 2 or 3 of them that were lined up, and then COVID came along and they're on hold. They're not canceled, but they're on hold.
Okay. So keep us posted when the workshops get started again. We will, we can keep everybody up to date as well, to let them know that they're coming. What is next? Are you still writing? Is there another book on the way?
Well, actually, I am writing some right now. I'm doing a lot of blogging and things. And right now, politically, people are on opposite sides of the fence. At least they think they are. And I've been blessed. I have this house cleaning business with Linda, and we go into people's homes that are all over the spectrum. And I'm telling you, they're all good. They all want good for other people. And I'm able to talk to them and get their ideas and to come back and say, okay, this is how I can approach this to get them to see what is actually happening. And because I'm an inventor, I can go through those steps and say, okay, if this happens, then this will happen, and so on and so forth. So that's the new book is basically, a working title is Freedom, What Is It?
I love it. And any idea when that will be ready? Or you, if not, that's fine. You're just gonna have to come back and update us when that one comes out.
No, I
That's
really
totally
don't
cool.
know. Yeah, I really don't know.
All right, well, keep us posted on that as well. Neal Brownell
Thank you.
and the lovely Linda, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the
She's
Power
waving.
podcast. Any last minute words before we wrap up?
No, just never underestimate anyone. Look for the good in people. People are good. I told you that I was born essentially blind, and I feel people's energy. And it is so rare that I meet someone that is evil. You might as well say it doesn't exist. And so people are good. So start with that.
I love it. I love it. And with that, we will end with, you are never stuck, you are never lost, and you are never alone. At any given moment, you can use your power to pivot, which is to make a new choice and start again. And with that, we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, Neal. Bye, Linda.
Bye. Thanks, Elizabeth.